to another night of shadows and dreams in Gotham. Tonight, we'll be listening to a tale of a young boy's tragedy in the cold Gotham night, to a symbol that transcends time itself. This is a story of loss and redemption, of darkness and hope, of a man who chose to become something more than human in service of justice. So find a comfortable position. Let your breathing slow and allow the rain-slicked streets of our story to wash over you, carrying you gently towards sleep. The air in the city tonight is cool, carrying with it the clean, earthy scent of recent rain. Imagine it, a fine mist hanging in the air, blurring the edges of the distant neon signs, turning them into soft watercolors of red and blue, bleeding into the darkness. We begin our story on a night much like this one. Years ago, in the heart of the city's grand theater district, the lights of the Monarch Theater marquee blinked in a slow, steady rhythm, casting a golden glow on the damp pavement below. A family emerged from the heavy oak doors, their laughter, a small, warm sound in the vastness of the city night. Thomas Wayne, a man whose presence was as comforting and solid as the city's oldest architecture, adjusted his coat against the evening chill. Beside him, Martha Wayne, a woman of effortless grace, pulled her shawl tighter, her smile as radiant as the string of pearls that rested at her throat. And between them, holding each of their hands, was their son, Bruce. His small world was one of perfect, unshakable safety, defined by the warm grip of his father's hand and the gentle hum of his mother's voice. They had just seen a film about a masked hero, a man with a sword and a noble cause. For a boy like Bruce, the story was a grand adventure, a fantasy of good triumphing over evil. He looked up at his father, a man who, in his own way, was a hero. Dr. Thomas Wayne was a healer, a man who dedicated his life to mending the broken parts of Gotham. Not with a sword, but with science and compassion. He looked at his mother, a woman who championed the city's forgotten souls, who believed in the power of kindness to heal wounds that no medicine could touch. In the warm bubble of his family, the city outside was just a backdrop, a collection of interesting sounds and lights. They decided to take a shortcut, a familiar route, down a narrow alley they had taken dozens of times before. The alley was a canyon of brick and steel, and their footsteps echoed softly against the walls. The sounds of the main street faded, replaced by the gentle dripping of water from a fire escape and the distant wail of a lone siren, a sound so common in Gotham it was like the cry of a nocturnal bird. Bruce felt the texture of the pavement through the thin soles of his shoes and saw the way the single flickering gas lamp at the far end of the alley cast long, dancing shadows. It was a moment of simple, perfect contentment, a memory that would later be preserved in amber, flawless and untouchable. Then, the texture of the night changed. It was a subtle shift, like a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. A figure detached itself from the deeper shadows near the alley's mouth. He was a man made of frayed edges and desperation, his face obscured by the darkness, his voice a raw, nervous rasp that cut through the quiet. He held a gun, and the metal caught the dim light with a dull, menacing sheen. The world seemed to slow, the sounds becoming thick and syrupy. Bruce felt his father move slightly in front of him, a protective shield. He heard his father's voice, calm and measured, trying to de-escalate, to reason with the unreasoning fear that stood before them. He was a doctor, a healer, trying to calm a frantic pulse. The demand for money, for valuables, was almost secondary to the palpable panic radiating from the gunman. Martha Wayne's hand went to her pearls, her fingers fumbling with the clasp. The string broke. The sound was like a tiny, sharp crack of ice. The pearls, each one a small, perfect orb of captured light, scattered across the grimy asphalt, rolling into the dark corners of the alley like a handful of spilled stars. It was that sound, that small, insignificant sound, that seemed to break the spell. A flash of light, a deafening bang that was swallowed by the brick and stone. Then another. The warmth and safety that had defined Bruce's entire existence vanished in an instant. His hands, once held so securely, were suddenly empty. He was left standing alone, a small, silent witness under the single flickering lamp, as a fine mist of rain began to fall, mingling with the steam rising from the ground, washing the scattered pearls until they gleamed like polished tears in the deepening gloom. The world that followed was one of muffled sounds and muted colors. Wayne Manor, the grand, sprawling estate that had been his playground and his castle, became a silent, cavernous museum of his grief. The laughter that had once filled its halls was replaced by an oppressive stillness, a silence so profound that the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer sounded like hammer blows. Days drifted by in a gray, featureless haze. Bruce would sit for hours in the vast library, surrounded by thousands of books, yet unable to read a single word. He would wander the manicured gardens, the scent of roses and damp earth doing little to stir him from his stupor. He was a ghost in his own home, and the only person who seemed to see him clearly was Alfred Pennyworth. The family butler was more than just a servant. He was a fixture, a bedrock of constancy in a world that had crumbled. Alfred did not try to fill the silence with meaningless words of comfort. Instead, he communicated through quiet, consistent action. He made sure Bruce ate, placing trays of warm food before him. The simple, nourishing meals a testament to the stubborn persistence of life. He made sure Bruce's clothes were clean, his bed was made, that some semblance of order remained in the chaos of his inner world. Alfred's presence was a low, steady hum of normalcy. He was the keeper of routines, the guardian of the mundane. And in doing so, he provided a fragile tether to the world for a boy who was in danger of drifting away entirely. He would build a fire in the hearth on cool evenings, the soft crackle of the logs a comforting sound against the silence, a small pocket of warmth and light in the overwhelming darkness. Sleep, when it came, was not a refuge. It was a return to the alley, a nightly reenactment of his powerlessness. He would wake up in the dark, his heart pounding, the cold feeling of his empty hands a physical ache in his chest. It was during one of these long, sleepless nights that he found himself drawn to his father's study. The room had been left untouched. a perfect shrine to the man who had occupied it. The air held the faint, lingering scent of leather, old paper, and his father's pipe tobacco. It was a room of quiet contemplation and tireless work. On the heavy oak desk, amidst stacks of medical journals, lay a personal diary bound in dark green leather. With trembling fingers, Bruce opened it. His father's handwriting, a familiar, elegant script, filled the pages. He wrote not only of his work at the hospital, but of his deep, abiding love for Gotham. He saw the city not as a cesspool of crime and corruption, but as a place of immense potential, a living entity that was sick and in need of healing. He wrote of his belief in the fundamental goodness of its people, his frustration with the systemic decay that allowed the desperate to fall through the cracks, and his unwavering hope for a brighter future. He believed in fighting for the city's soul, not just in the operating theater, but in the community, in philanthropy, in civic duty. As Bruce read these words, something shifted within him. The raw, directionless agony of his grief began to coalesce around a new, hard core of purpose. His father's work was not finished. The fight had not ended in that alley. It had been a violent, tragic interruption. It was a legacy waiting to be claimed. The torch had not been extinguished. It had been passed. In the silent, book-lined room, surrounded by the ghost of his father, the boy made a silent vow. He would not just be a victim of the city's darkness. He would dedicate his life to understanding it, to confronting it, and to finishing his father's work. He would fight for the soul of Gotham. As the years passed, the boy grew into a young man, but the vow he made never faded. It became the central pillar of his existence. He realized, with a clarity that was both cold and absolute, that he could not become what he needed to be in the insular, privileged world of Wayne. The name itself was a shield, a buffer against the harsh realities he needed to understand. He had to shed his skin to become anonymous, to learn about the world not from books in his father's library, but from the ground up. He had to understand the fear and desperation that had created the man with the gun. He had to walk in the shoes of the forgotten, to feel their hunger, their hopelessness. He explained this to Alfred his voice, but firm, with a resolve that was years beyond his age. Alfred, whose love for the boy was as deep and constant as the sea, listened without interruption. He did not argue or try to dissuade him. He understood the profound necessity of this pilgrimage. His journey was a descent into the crucible. He traveled to the furthest, most unforgiving corners of the globe, seeking out masters of skills that could not be taught in any university. He began in the frozen, wind-swept peaks of the Himalayas, the air so thin and pure that each breath was a conscious effort. He sought out a legendary monastery, a sanctuary of stone and silence, clinging to the mountainside. There, under the tutelage of monks whose minds were as sharp and clear as the mountain air, he began the arduous process of mastering his own body. He learned to treat pain as an illusion, a sensation to be observed but not obeyed. He practiced meditation for days on end, sitting in the biting cold, his body unmoving, his mind journeying deep into the labyrinth of his own consciousness. He confronted the memory of the alley, not to erase it, but to understand it, to strip it of its power over him. He learned to control his heart rate, to slow his breathing, to command his own physiology in ways that seemed impossible. He was breaking himself down to his most fundamental components and rebuilding himself piece by piece into something stronger, something more resilient. He was forging his mind into a weapon, a tool of absolute, unwavering focus. The rage that had simmered within him for so long was not extinguished, but rather it was channeled, cooled, and shaped into a disciplined, controlled energy. From the silent mountains, he traveled to the dense, steaming jungles of South America, a world of vibrant, dangerous life. He learned from shamans and hunters, men and women who moved through the suffocatingly dense undergrowth with the silence and grace of the jaguars they revered. He learned the arts of stealth and tracking how to melt into the shadows, how to read the language of the forest in the snap of a twig or the call of a bird. He trained his body to the peak of physical perfection, honing his senses until he could hear the whisper of a footstep from 100 yards away, until he could smell the approach of a predator on the wind. He learned a dozen different forms of martial arts, not the flashy, performative styles of dojos, but the brutally efficient, practical techniques of survival. He learned how to disarm an opponent in seconds, how to use their momentum against them, how to neutralize a threat with minimal effort and maximum precision. His body became a living weapon. Every muscle, every tendon conditioned for a singular purpose. He was not just learning to fight. He was learning the science of combat, the physics of force, the psychology of intimidation. He saw firsthand how corruption and systemic failure bred desperation, how poverty could be a vice that squeezed all morality out of a person. He saw the face of the man from the alley again and again in countless different forms, in countless different cities. This immersion into the darkness did not corrupt him. It solidified his resolve. It stripped away any naive, black and white notions of good and evil and replaced them with a nuanced, practical understanding of human nature. He was learning not just how to fight crime, but how to think like a criminal, to anticipate their moves, to understand their world from the inside out. He was gathering the disparate threads of knowledge and skill, weaving them together into the fabric of the man he was to become. Years passed, and the boy who left Gotham was gone, replaced by a man who was a master of 1,000 disciplines. His mind, a razor-sharp instrument. His body, a perfectly honed weapon. His will, an unbreakable force of nature. The pilgrimage was over. It was time to go home. The Gotham he returned to was a city on its knees. The hope his father had written of in his journals seemed like a distant, faded dream. The crime and corruption that had always been present had metastasized, growing into a cancer that had infected every level of the city's infrastructure, from the police on the streets to the judges in the courts. Fear was the currency of the city, a toxic smog that hung heavier than the industrial pollution. Bruce Wayne, officially declared dead years ago, returned as a phantom, moving through his old life with a sense of profound detachment. He reclaimed his inheritance, his public persona, a carefully constructed mask of a vapid playboy billionaire, a perfect camouflage to hide the man he had become. He moved back into Wayne Manor, where Alfred had kept everything in a state of perfect preservation. A silent, patient vigil. The reunion between the two men was one of quiet dignity, a lifetime of shared history and unspoken understanding, conveyed in a simple nod. Alfred saw the change in Bruce, the hardness in his eyes, the coiled, disciplined energy in his posture. The boy was gone. A soldier had returned in his place. Bruce knew that fighting the city's decay as Bruce Wayne through philanthropy and business was not enough. That was his father's way, and it had not saved him. The criminals of Gotham were a superstitious and cowardly lot. They preyed on the fearful. To fight them, he needed to become a symbol that could strike fear. His own childhood fear of the creatures that lived in the dark caves beneath the manor suddenly became his greatest inspiration. He would take the form of his deepest fear and turn it into a weapon against those who prey on the fearful. He would become a bat. With Alfred's reluctant but unwavering assistance, the transformation began. Deep beneath Wayne Manor, in the vast network of limestone caves that his ancestors had used as part of the Underground Railroad. He built his sanctuary, his base of operations, the Bat Cave. It became a fusion of ancient geology and cutting-edge technology. He built a state-of-the-art supercomputer, its monitors casting a cool blue glow on the damp cavern walls. He established forensic labs, workshops, and a training area. This was the heart of his new mission. He began designing his suit, not as a costume, but as a suit of armor. It had to be durable enough to stop a knife, light enough to allow for acrobatic movement, and, most importantly, it had to be terrifying. He developed a cowl with pointed ears and white, sightless lenses for eyes, creating an inhuman silhouette. The centerpiece was the symbol on his chest, a stark black bat, a target designed to draw fire to the most heavily armored part of his suit, and a brand to be seared into the minds of the criminal element. He designed and fabricated his tools, the grappling hook that would allow him to navigate the city's concrete canyons as if he had wings, the silent, multi-bladed throwing weapons shaped like his chosen symbol, the batarangs, the smoke pellets for stealth and misdirection. Every piece of equipment was meticulously engineered for a specific purpose. He was no longer just a man. He was becoming an arsenal, a one-man war on crime. The final piece was the vehicle. He retrofitted a prototype armored car from his company's Applied Sciences division, turning it into a black, heavily fortified beast of a machine, a phantom that would haunt the city's streets. The Batmobile. The first night he went out was a test. The air was cold and carried the familiar scent of rain and exhaust. He stood on a rooftop, the city sprawling before him like a galaxy of electric stars. He was not Bruce Wayne. He was something else, a new entity, born of tragedy and purpose. The weight of the cowl felt strange, the world seen through its lenses slightly distorted. He could hear the city breathing, the distant shouts, the rumble of the elevated train, the constant, low-level thrum of a million lives intersecting. He was nervous, but it was the focused, sharp-edged nervousness of a surgeon before the first incision. He began to move, a black shadow flitting from rooftop to rooftop, his movements silent and precise. He was a ghost, an urban legend in the making. He found his first targets, a group of muggers preying on a couple in a darkened side street, a scene chillingly reminiscent of his own past. He descended upon them not as a man, but as a force of nature. He faded back into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared, leaving behind only the terrified, babbling accounts of a giant bat, a demon that had come from the darkness. The legend of the Batman had begun. His relationship with the Gotham City Police Department was, at first, one of mutual distrust. To them, he was a vigilante, a dangerous, unknown quantity, operating outside the law. But there was one man in the deeply corrupt department who was different. Captain James Gordon. Gordon was a good cop in a bad city, a man drowning in a sea of cynicism and graft, but still clinging to his principles. He saw in the Batman not a menace, but a potential, if terrifying, ally. Their first meetings were clandestine affairs on foggy rooftops, surrounded by the stone gargoyles that watched over the city. Gordon would light the signal, a makeshift searchlight with a bat symbol crudely fastened over the lens, and he would wait. The Batman would appear out of the darkness, as if materializing from the night itself, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that seemed to come from the shadows around them. They formed a wary, unspoken alliance. Two men from opposite sides of the law united by a common goal: to save their city. Gordon would provide information, a view from the inside, while the Batman would operate in the shadows, doing what the police could not. He became Gordon's weapon, his ghost, the terrifying rumor that could shake down informants and break open cases that had long gone cold. He was the city's dark knight, a necessary evil to combat a greater one. The night settled into a rhythm, a long, repeating pattern of ritual and duty. The descent into the cave became a sacred act, a shedding of the skin of Bruce Wayne. The process of putting on the suit was a meditation. The soft click of the armored plates locking into place. The feel of the cool Nomex material against his skin. The slight hiss of the cowl's hydraulics as it sealed around his head, muffling the outside world and focusing his senses. Each piece was a part of the transformation, a deliberate step away from the man and towards the symbol. When he was fully garbed, he would stand for a moment in the cool, silent air of the cave, the giant computer monitors reflecting in his white lenses, the low hum of the machinery, the only sound. He was no longer a man driven by grief, but an instrument of justice, cold, focused, and absolute. He would walk towards the Batmobile, its black, angular form waiting like a patient predator. The canopy would slide shut with a soft whoosh, encasing him in the cockpit, a world of glowing readouts, and the deep, throaty rumble of the engine coming to life. The massive cave doors would grind open, and he would rocket out into the waiting night, a black arrow aimed at the heart of Gotham's darkness. His patrol was a silent ballet, performed across the rooftops of the city. He moved with a preternatural grace. From these vantage points, he watched the city breathe. He listened to its heartbeat through a network of police scanners and encrypted communication channels piped directly into his cowl. He saw the patterns of the city's nightlife, the flow of traffic, the areas where the darkness seemed to pool and fester. He was a shepherd watching over a sleeping, vulnerable flock. His interventions were often swift and silent. A purse snatcher stopped in his tracks by a batarang that pinned his coat to a wall. A drug deal scattered by a volley of smoke pellets, and the terrifying, fleeting glimpse of a demonic shape in the swirling fog. A would-be kidnapper finding himself suddenly hanging upside down from a lamppost, wrapped in a high tensile cable. He was a whisper, a rumor, a ghost story that the criminals of Gotham told each other in hushed, frightened tones. They began to fear the shadows, to look over their shoulders on empty streets. For the first time, the predators of the city felt what it was like to be the prey. His war was not just against the common street thug. A new kind of criminal was beginning to emerge in Gotham, drawn to the challenge that the Batman represented. They were theatrical, obsessive, and brilliant in their own twisted ways. Men and women who wore masks and adopted personas, turning crime into a form of perverse performance art. There was the Joker, an agent of pure chaos, with a rictus grin and a love for anarchy, who saw the Batman not as an enemy, but as the punchline to a grand cosmic joke. There was the Riddler, a man whose intellect was matched only by his obsessive need to prove it, leaving a trail of confounding puzzles in the wake of his crimes. There was the Penguin, a deformed aristocrat of crime, who operated from the shadows of his iceberg-themed lounge. And there was Catwoman, a master thief with a fluid, ambiguous morality, who was both an adversary and a kindred spirit, another creature of the night who danced along the line between darkness and light. Each of these new adversaries tested him in different ways, pushing his physical, mental, and ethical boundaries. They were the dark reflections of his own theatricality, the monstrous children of the same city that had created him. The fight against them was a never-ending chess game played out on the grand board of Gotham City. A battle not just for the lives of its citizens, but for its very soul, but for every spectacular confrontation with a supercriminal. This was the unglamorous, solitary reality of his crusade. He was a detective first, a warrior second. His greatest weapon was not his fists, but his mind. He would sit for hours in front of the Bat computer's glowing screens, the faces of victims and suspects flickering across the monitors, their stories playing out in the silent data streams. He carried the weight of every unsolved case, every life he couldn't save. These quiet, lonely hours were a different kind of battle, a fight against the overwhelming tide of entropy and despair that threatened to swallow his city. It was in these moments surrounded by the cool, damp air of the cave, that the true cost of his vow was most apparent. He had sacrificed the possibility of a normal life, of love, of peace, for this unending nocturnal war. And through it all, there was Alfred. He was the anchor, the confidant, the one person who saw the man behind the mask. He was the one who would be waiting in the cave when the Batman returned, bruised and exhausted, as the first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky. He would silently and efficiently stitch the wounds, both physical and psychological. He would offer a cup of hot tea, a dry observation, a piece of sardonic wit that could cut through the darkest of moods. Alfred was his conscience, his memory, the voice that reminded him of his own humanity when he was in danger of being consumed by the darkness he fought. He was the one who tended to the graves of Thomas and Martha Wayne, who kept their memory alive, not as a source of pain, but as a source of inspiration. He was the only family Bruce had left, the steadfast guardian who had raised a lost boy into a legendary hero. Theirs was a relationship forged in tragedy and sustained by a deep, unspoken love and a shared, unwavering commitment to the mission. Alfred was not just a butler. He was the heart of the entire operation, the quiet, unsung hero of the Batman's long, lonely war. As the years went on, the Batman became more than just a man. He became a permanent part of the city's fabric, an urban myth made real. He was the monster parents told their children about to make them behave, and the silent guardian those same parents prayed for when they heard a strange noise in the night. He had become the symbol he had always intended to be. But the solitary nature of his mission began to take its toll. The darkness was a heavy burden to carry alone. It was then that others were drawn into his orbit, sparks of light in his shadowy world. A young circus acrobat named Dick Grayson, who suffered a tragedy eerily similar to his own, became his ward. Bruce saw in the boy a reflection of his own pain and anger, and he chose to offer him a different path. He trained him, mentored him. He was no longer just a solitary soldier. He was a general, a father figure, a mentor. He was building a legacy, an army of dedicated protectors to ensure that no child in Gotham would have to suffer the same fate he did. Tonight, however, is a quiet night. The great theatrical villains are silent, locked away in the Gothic asylum on Arkham Island, their mad schemes dormant for now. The city is breathing softly, wrapped in a blanket of cool, damp air. The Batman is on patrol, a solitary figure perched atop the antenna of the Gotham Merchants Bank building. From here, he can see the entire city, a sprawling, glittering tapestry of light and shadow. The sound of the city is a low, constant hum, punctuated by the distant cry of a siren and the rumble of a passing train. He is not looking for trouble. He is simply watching, listening, feeling the pulse of his city. His cape, a scalloped wing of black Kevlar, shifts slightly in the breeze that weaves through the canyons of steel and glass. He closes his eyes behind the cowl's lenses, focusing on the sounds. He can isolate the sound of a conversation on the street, hundreds of feet below, the frantic clicking of a businesswoman's heels as she hurries home, the gentle lapping of the Gotham River against the industrial piers. He is a part of the city's nocturnal ecosystem, its apex predator, its silent guardian. This is his sanctuary, this solitude, high above the sleeping world. The weight of his mission is constant, a physical presence on his shoulders. But up here, in the quiet embrace of the night, it feels manageable. It feels like peace. A notification flickers on the inside of his cowl's lens. A direct, encrypted message from Jim Gordon, now the commissioner. It's not the signal, not an emergency, just a location. Quiet night, Gordon says, his voice a weary but warm rumble. The Batman nods, his own voice, the familiar low growl that is more an effect of the cowl's vocal processor than his own. For now, they stand in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Two old soldiers sharing a moment of respite on the battlefield. The steam from Gordon's coffee rises in a white plume, disappearing into the cold night air. They don't need to say much. They have been fighting this war together for so long that they can communicate in the silences. Gordon is one of the few people who has seen glimpses of the man behind the terrifying mask, who understands the profound sacrifice that has been made. He represents the soul of the city that the Batman fights so hard to protect. A small, simple gesture of friendship, of partnership in their lonely war. He stands there for a long time. The warmth of the cup, a small point of heat against the cool leather of his gloves, and watches the city. He sees the lights in the windows of the distant apartments, and he thinks of the people inside, living their lives, dreaming their dreams, completely unaware of the silent guardian watching over them from the rooftops. This is why he does it. For them, for the boy in the alley, for his parents. He is the watcher on the walls, the night in the darkness. He is the reason that even in a city like Gotham, a good man like Jim Gordon can still sleep at night. As the first faint hint of gray begins to lighten the eastern horizon, the Batman knows his watch is coming to an end. The creatures of the night, both criminal and guardian, must retreat before the coming of the day. He makes his way back across the city, his movements as silent and purposeful as ever, back towards the hidden entrance that will lead him home. The Batmobile glides through the pre-dawn streets, its engine a low whisper a black phantom racing the rising sun. He is no longer the symbol. He is just Bruce Wayne, a man, tired and bruised, his face etched with the weariness of another long night. Alfred is there, as he always is, with a tray holding a steaming mug and a medical kit. The silent, familiar routine begins. Alfred tends to the cuts and bruises, while Bruce sips the hot, sweet tea. The warmth chasing away some of the deep, bone-chilling cold of the night. They don't speak of the patrol. They don't need to. They speak of mundane things, of stock prices, of the weather, of the state of the rose bushes in the garden. It is their way of re-anchoring him to the world of the living, of pulling him back from the abyss he inhabits every night. The man must be tended to just as much as the mission. As the sun finally rises, casting its first golden rays through the high hidden windows of Wayne Manor, Bruce stands before the Bat computer. The screens show a city waking up. The news reports a quiet night. The crime rates lower than they've been in months. It is a small victory, a temporary peace, but it is a victory nonetheless. He looks at the suit, standing empty in its case, a hollow black shell that holds so much fear and hope. His long night is over. He has carried the burden. He has kept the watch. And he has allowed the city and its millions of souls to dream in peace. And now, as the sun fills the sky, the dark night can finally rest, knowing that he will be there again when the shadows fall. He is the guardian, the protector, the Batman, and his story, like the night itself, is eternal.